Mathias, to you the microphone. You have 15 minutes and then Giovanni Fontana will interview you and 15 minutes we dedicate to the students. They will ask you their questions. All right? Good
Thank
time.
you very much
Good
for
speech.
the wonderful introduction.
Thank you.
I'm very honored to be here, although I think you took a pretty big risk to invite a German speaker. German speakers are world famous for their long and boring speeches. You may know the story of 3 soldiers. An Italian, an American, and a German soldier are caught in a trap by terrorists and immediately sentenced to death. So they ask each of the soldiers for a last wish. And the American soldier says, actually, I would love to sing for a last time the national anthem. So the terrorists say, okay, that's not a problem. Then they ask the German, what is your last wish? And the German says, well, actually, I would like to give a very in-depth and profound speech about the injustice of unilateral war under UN mandate. And they say, okay, not a problem, you can do that. And then they ask the Italian, so what is your wish? And he says, please shoot me first. I don't want to listen to the speech of the German. I try to be brief, but it's a real challenge, particularly once you're talking about the digitization of our business and the future of journalism in the digital world. To sum it up and give you the short version of my speech, I think the future of journalism in the digital world is bright. So actually, I could end with that. But let me go a little more into details. And let me tell you one observation that former Prime Minister of Bavaria, Edmund Stoiber, has recently shared with me. Edmund Stoiber has a granddaughter, and he was sitting together with his granddaughter at the breakfast table. And as always, the big South German newspaper, Süddeutsche Zeitung, was on the desk. And suddenly, his granddaughter was always tapping on the photo on the front page. And after repeating that for a couple of times, she said, "Granddaddy, it's not working." You know, she was used that if you tap on a photo or if you swipe a photo, something is happening. She was representing the generation of the tablet newspapers, of the smartphone newspapers, of the digital newspapers. Edmund Stoiber took that as a very depressing lesson. He said, okay, that is clearly showing that the young generation has no interest in newspapers at all. I think it is a complete misunderstanding. Actually, it showed that there is an interest in newspapers. And not only that there is an interest in doing something with a newspaper, read it and benefit from it, but also there is a kind of way how newspaper journalism can be enriched and how much more interesting the consumption of a newspaper can be in the digital world. To be very brief and brutal, I think maybe that in a couple of decades or years, newspapers on paper are not playing a role anymore. I'm not saying that they're disappearing completely, but they are playing a smaller and smaller role, economically and also politically and with regard to their role in society. But I'm deeply convinced that newspaper journalism will play a big role. And that's why I'm saying it is much smarter not to defend the paper on which news are printed today, but really to defend newspaper journalism. I think it is in the end about the emancipation of newspaper journalism from paper. We have to make sure, we publishers and we journalists have to make sure that newspaper journalism is an intact and promising business model in the digital world. If we limit our efforts to defend paper, we are going to lose that battle. If we are going to focus our efforts on the defense of newspaper journalism, of great independent branded content, then I really think we have a bright future. Why would newspaper journalism necessarily be less interesting, less profound, just because it is not printed on paper, that it made out of trees, but if it is published on electronic paper? I don't see a reason. First of all, electronic paper will look sooner or later pretty similar to a newspaper. Today, a smartphone is electronic paper or a tablet PC. I think in 10 years from now, electronic paper will pretty much look like this piece of paper. Yeah? You can fold it, you can roll it, you can put it in your pocket. It's very easy to handle. And it looks almost like paper today. And if that's the case, there is no issue about the question, is it a paper or not, or electronic paper? The only question is, are the stories, are the news, are the investigative reports, are the comments, is the content on this paper, on this electronic paper, interesting enough? And I think in general, digital journalism can be better because it can be faster. You don't have editorial deadlines. You can work on your news flow 24 hours. Newspaper journalism on digital paper can be better because it is richer. You can add written content, plus video content, plus audio content, and you can create completely new forms of journalism and new mix of content. So it is richer and better. Newspaper journalism on digital paper is better because it can be smarter, simply more educated, because you cannot only provide the resource of your own knowledge and intelligence or the one of your archive, you also can include the knowledge, the wisdom of your readers, because immediately they can react and can add facts, figures, correct wrong facts immediately, and add thoughts. And so newspaper journalism or digital paper can be smarter. Of course, it will be interactive. You can directly interact with your reader, and you have no limitations of space. You don't have to edit a story and cut 30 lines because you have unlimited space. If you need the space and if you want to have an 800-line story, you can just publish it with one click of your mouse. And if you want to have a short version of 2 sentences, you can do it at the same time. So in the end, from a pure content perspective, from a journalistic perspective, there are many reasons why digital newspaper journalism can be better than the one that we know today. The only issue here is, how do we deal, or there are 2 issues actually. One is, how do we deal with technology? Are we able to include technology truly into the production of news? In the former times, we had a creative editorial team that was working on a product. They were handing it over to a printing plant that was technically producing the product, and they were handing it over to the distribution department. They were distributing it to the readers. This is old school, is not the model of the future. In the future, you can only create the best possible journalism and the best layout and the best ideas if you know the technology that can shape that can do it. So there needs to be a close link between technology and editorial, and at the same time to distribution, because the editor is at the same time managing, in a way, the search engine optimization, and with that the traffic, and with that, in a way, the reach and the circulation of its product. So technology will play a much bigger role. And the second crucial question is, will we have in the digital world a business model? So far, most of the publishers around the world and in Europe tend to offer everything that they were working for and doing in their work life in the digital space for free. I think that's a big misunderstanding. If we don't believe that what we are doing as journalists has a value, and if we don't believe that this value needs a price, and if we do not convince our readers that they have to pay for what they get, then I think it's a lost case. It's a kind of free beer culture. If you ask people, would you like to pay for your wine or beer, or would you rather get it for free? 99% will tell you, of course, I prefer to get it for free. Same here. We, the publishers, have made that mistake, and we have now to correct that mistake and have step by step to implement subscription models for our digital newspapers on the websites, on the iPads, on the smartphones. And if that works, if paid content works, I think even the business model of branded content in the digital space is better because your cost base is much better. You don't have paper costs, you don't have printing costs, you don't have distribution costs. You only have costs for editorial and for marketing and for technology. And with that, you can generate much better margins, much higher profits with digital news offerings if you have access to advertising money and if you have access to the paying subscriber than in the analog world. And also from a journalistic point, if paper and paper quality and printing quality and distribution quality and number of newsstands doesn't play a role, the only distinguishing factor is the quality of the story, is the quality of journalism. So in a way, the value of the journalism and of the journalistic quality gets higher because it is the only and crucial distinguishing factor that makes one reader to prefer this brand and another one, another brand. So I think the digital environment can be a truly stimulating environment for better journalism and for more competition in the journalism. We and Axel Springer, to conclude, have in a way years ago said this progress, this digital transformation is happening. We are seeing the figures and facts around the world, the declining circulation, the declining advertising revenues, the new habits of a younger generation that is represented here in the room that is preferring to consume news and information and entertainment on digital devices. We will not be able to fight that trend. We have to embrace the progress. We should not try to protect our old models and our old habits. And so we said, let's aggressively digitize our brands, our content, our business models, and let's do it very, very focused, concentrated on our traditional core competencies. A newspaper company knows traditionally three things well: how to create the best possible journalism, how to monetize the journalistic brands towards advertising clients, and how to use the reach that you have achieved in order to establish classified ads, which is basically real estate, jobs, and cars. That was the business model of a newspaper in the analog world. And that is our business model of a publishing company in the digital world. We either launch or buy market-leading content portals. We either launch or buy market-leading marketing companies, mainly performance marketing companies, and we either launch or buy market-leading classified ad portals, jobs, cars, real estate. And with that, we have achieved pretty impressive results. I'm saying that not only because I'm so terribly proud of that, that's also part of the truth, but I'm telling it to you also because I want to show you that what I'm telling here is not the naive hope of a dreamer. It is in a way based on achieved results. And in the case of Axel Springer, I can just tell you that in the last business year, 2012, we had with 628 million euro the highest operating profit in the history of the company. We achieved 47% of our profits with digital businesses, with online businesses. So roughly half of the profits of Axel Springer are already deriving from digital businesses. 65, these are now figures based on the first quarter of this year, 47% of the profits, and 65% of the advertising revenues are coming from digital businesses. So 65% only from online advertising, and the remaining 35% are from newspapers, magazines in Germany and abroad. I have to admit that this is a figure that was even surprising ourselves. 1.2 billion euro sales we are generating with our digital businesses. That is by far the biggest segment of the company, and in contrast to the print business, it is growing fast. I think that is encouraging because it shows that you can do something if you, in a very optimistic spirit and in a creative spirit and in a spirit that is based on journalism and the quality of journalism as the fundament of our business model, you can achieve great things in this digitization. I'm not saying that this is the only way. It's not a general recipe. it is always very difficult to deal with leadership and predictions and forecasts. You should be very careful. And to conclude that, let me tell you at the end the last anecdote. It is about a settler who is preparing himself for the winter in an Indian reserve in Canada. And he's standing in front of his hut and is chopping wood. And suddenly an Indian guy is coming along the road, and since the settler is not very sure about the winter, whether it's going to be a strong winter or not, he asks the Indian, because he believes in the wisdom of the Indians, and he asked him, how do you think is the winter going to be? And the Indian looks at him and says, it's going to be a cold winter. Okay, so the settler is continuing to chop wood even more, and in the afternoon the Indian comes back, and the settler asks him, are you really sure that the winter is getting cold? And the Indian looks at him and says, yeah, actually the winter is getting very cold. Okay, so the settler is really nervous and is chopping wood all the night. Yeah? The next morning, the Indian comes along again. The settler is completely, sweating and asking, are you really sure that the winter is getting that cold? And he said, yeah, absolutely. It's one of the coldest winters in history. So the settler is completely overwhelmed by the wisdom of the Indians and asks him, how do you know that? And the Indian said, it's very simple. If the white man is chopping a lot of wood, the winter is going to be very cold. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bene. Allora do il tempo di sistemare il traduttore, ok? Io farei a questo punto, abbiamo ascoltato l'introduzione molto interessante, vivace, anche molto netta del dottor Dopfner sul modello di business di Axel Springer. Io farei solo 3 domande molto, molto rapide per poi passare, perché abbiamo 12 minuti per poi passare agli studenti. La prima, più che una domanda, è un'informazione che le do. In Italia, quando qualcosa nelle nostre aziende editoriali non va, oppure c'è qualche progetto che va un po' rilento, ci dicono studiate Axel Springer, andate a vedere come hanno fatto. Insomma, lei è diventato un po' un incubo per i giornalisti italiani. Lei è stato un giornalista in passato, ha diretto Die Welt ed altri importanti giornali. Questa trasformazione molto accelerata e molto netta, lei ha sempre posizione, ha detto con la carta non c'è più niente da fare, stop, non investiamo più nulla, ha unificato redazioni, ha detto meglio un buon editorialista che scrive per 3 giornali che pagarne 3 che ripetono lo stesso pezzo. Con i suoi ex colleghi come si è trovato?
Well, first of all, I definitely don't want to be a nightmare for Italian journalists.
No, nightmare is exaggeration.
But I don't want to be a nightmare because I am still a journalist. I consider myself as a journalist in the function of a CEO, but my whole mindset is still driven by journalism, and that's why I have very close contact, of course, to our journalists, and here and there I'm also writing my own articles. I think a good access to journalists and motivated journalists who feel well and feel secure is decisive for the success of a publishing company. Of course, we are cutting costs every year, but we really try to focus with our cost cutting on technology, on reducing bureaucracy and overheads, on efficiency with regard to workflows, on multimedia integration, to use one editorial team for a print paper and for its online version. But we really try not to cut costs on the editorial side. On the contrary, we have just implemented a 1.5 million extra budget on top of the existing budgets for investigative reporting in order to incentivize our people to do extraordinary investigative work. And I think this culture that journalism in the hierarchy of the publishing company is the highest priority, I think that is particularly important if you want to motivate people to do this digital transition. And if I'm speaking so optimistically about the electronic newspapers, I'm not saying that the printed newspaper has no value or is going to die in 2 years. I really think that it has a future. And in certain situations, people will also in 10 or 15 years prefer to read something on paper. Even my 17-year-old son prefers in certain situations to read something on paper. But the role of paper is going to decrease, and its economic importance is going to be smaller. And I think that's why we have to focus on the growth perspectives of our business.
Yes. I vostri ricavi dal digitale sono, se non vado errato, circa 1/3 da informazione, portali che fanno informazione, il resto da portali, siti che fanno un altro tipo di lavoro, marketing, vendite, e-commerce, community di interessi.
No e-commerce. We are not doing e-commerce. No, but I get your point. But let me just, in a way, I would slightly rephrase it. In the old analog world, you had a newspaper. In that newspaper, you were presenting journalism. That's why a reader would buy the paper and pay.
Okay.
Then you have advertising revenues because you sell advertising pages. You get that from advertising clients. And then you have the classified ads where you get money from the person who is looking for a new flat or is looking for a new job. So in a way, in a newspaper, you had 3 revenue models: the paying reader, the advertising client, and the classified ad client. And that's exactly the same thing that we are doing in the digital world. So, of course, we are only getting 1/3 of our money from content. But the other 1/3, basically, roughly, is from advertising, and the other 1/3 is from classifieds.
Right.
So I don't see any difference to what we have done in the past. And we are explicitly not doing e-commerce if we define e-commerce in the same sense. That is, that you're acting like a retailer, that you're selling products, and that you get a margin of the sold product where you have the inventory risk. This is something that we have never done and that we are not going to do.
L'ultima mia domanda è su Die Welt. Siete partiti con un sistema a pagamento, i primi 20 articoli free e poi si paga. Come è andato questo esperimento? Lei ha detto meglio 100.000 utenti paganti che 1 milione gratis. Li avete avuti questi 100.000 o è un esperimento ancora difficile?
Well, first of all, it's much better to have a smaller group of paying readers who are really loyal readers and are loyal to the brand than to have millions of readers who just take it because it is there for free. That's why we think it is of such crucial importance to step by step establish this subscription culture on the web. We have started with Die Welt. We are going to launch Bild, our other big brand, in June, July this year, and the other brands will follow. Of course, it is much too early to give real figures because it's still in a very early stage. And as a publicly listed company, we have the policy not to disclose any figures right now. But what I can tell you is that we are seeing figures that are significantly higher than those that we had in our budgets, that we expected. And to illustrate it a little more concretely, we are selling, in average by day, more digital subscriptions of Die Welt than analog subscriptions. And since we are still selling quite a bit of analog subscriptions, this shows you that it is a meaningful business. And if you then take into account that Die Welt is at the moment the only brand in Germany that is really charging for its website, let's imagine that there would be other websites that would go a similar route. I think the figures would even increase. So actually we feel very encouraged by these first experiences.
Okay, well. Prego. Facciamo 5 minuti di domande. Prego.
Can I speak in German? Or is it?
Wunderbar.
No. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
No, but nobody will understand you properly.
But
Yeah.
I don't understand, I think.
Also in Italien ist die Digital- und die Zeitung anders als die deutsche Zeitung. Wir können sagen, dass die italienische Zeitung nicht dieselbe ist. Also wenn Sie jetzt eine Online-Zeitung gucken und die gleiche Zeitung in der Zeitschrift angucken, ist nicht dasselbe. In Deutschland können wir sagen, dass, also jetzt Axel Springer, dass die Digitalversion und die Zeitschriftversion sehr similar sind, dass sie fast gleich sind. Wir können sagen, die sind gleich. Denken Sie, dass jetzt die Online-Version, also die Digitalversion und die Zeitschriftversion bis zum Punkt gleich sein sollten oder nur...
Okay. First of all, I'm impressed by your excellent German. Secondly, I try to briefly translate it. The question was, in Italy, the digital version and the analog version are very different, whereas in Germany it seems that the digital newspaper and the analog newspaper are very similar. And the question was if that is the role model, if it needs to be like that. I would slightly distinguish here the e-paper that we are offering, which is an exact copy of the newspaper, just as a PDF version, I mean just as a digital reading offer. You can subscribe it or buy it by issue on your tablet, and then you read basically in the same newspaper layout your newspaper just without using traditional paper. That's what we call the e-paper. But on top of that, we have also the website. And the website is, I think, in a very similar manner, different from the newspaper than it would be in Italy. So there is a different layout, there are different articles. I mean, very often we have, let's say at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, almost no article of the newspaper on the front website, because on the homepage, because there are so many new stories that happened since then. So that is the second way to do it. And then we have the apps that we do for the tablets and for the smartphones. And these apps, again, look different from the newspaper. Of course, parts of the content are the same, but the layout, the whole way to present it, can be very different. And I think we really need to, in a way, differentiate the whole chain of products in that manner. We have the printed paper on paper, we have the PDF version, the e-paper, that looks exactly the same, and then we have the website and the different apps.
Altra domanda? Una ragazza.
I don't have a translation now.
Buonasera. Posso parlare in italiano?
Now it's working. Now it's working. Yeah. Okay.
Ok. Sappiamo che la Axel Springer possiede molte testate giornalistiche e l'obiettivo di questa grande varietà dovrebbe essere quello di una grande varietà di contenuti e opinioni. Volevo sapere se è possibile ottenere questo obiettivo anche se le testate in questione sono sottoposte a un'unica direzione. Grazie.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think you are referring to the fact that we have organized some of our newspapers in these combined groups where you have one editorial team that is doing different products. Well, of course, if you have one team, you have certain articles, certain elements that are in all the papers the same. To illustrate that, we have combined Die Welt, our leading national quality newspaper, with two regional newspapers, Hamburger Abendblatt and Berliner Morgenpost, the leading regional newspaper in Hamburg and in Berlin. And they have 3 different editors-in-chief, but they are using the same team of journalists for the national content, and the regional papers are just focusing with their regional teams on the regional content, on Hamburg and on Berlin. Which means that the national articles, of course, are the same, and that reduces diversity, no question. But since you have independent editors, and since you have different focus on Berlin topics, on Hamburg topics, or on national, international topics. And since you have, particularly for the comments, for the editorial pieces, different writers with different views, still a pretty remarkable degree of diversity and plurality of opinions. If we wouldn't have done that, I'm pretty sure that from these 3 papers, probably only 2 or only 1 would still exist, and the others would have been folded. And I think with that way to reorganize editorial workflow, we have in the end, we have kept a certain editorial plurality. So I hope that this differentiated answer helps you. It's not an easy picture. We cannot say no, there is no variety, but we can also not say it's the same as it used to be. It's somewhere in between.
Ultima e rapida domanda.
My answers are too long. Perhaps I should try to give short answers, then you can have 3 questions.
Buonasera, io sono Jasmine, vengo dal liceo scientifico Leonardo Donatelli di Terni e volevo chiederle, lei che vive comunque una realtà dove non si sente la crisi come qui in Italia, cosa ci consiglia a noi italiani per superare la crisi italiana?
Oh, this is by far this is by far the toughest question that I got, and I really should not try to lecture you what to do. You know, I'm a big admirer of Italy and Italian culture and Italian people, and I think in many respects you have better ways to deal with problems, with challenges. You have a certain leggerezza, is it an appropriate word? Yeah. Which I think is in certain cases much more helpful than a very, stubborn, just disciplined manner to resolve things. In other areas, of course, discipline helps more than leggerezza, but in the end, it's all about the combination, and I really count on your own ways to get out of that crisis. And to be very honest, and this is a serious statement, I'm much less worried about the potential recovery of Italy, which I definitely think is going to happen, than I'm worried about the situation in France. I think this situation is a lot more serious, and I'm a lot more worried about that. So I think we should, in Europe, try to combine the different strengths of the different national mentalities, and with that have also diverse ways how to resolve crises.
Perfetto. L'ex presidente del Consiglio Monti disse: vorrei unità degli italiani un po' più tedeschi. Ci ha trovato così.
You know, we have the chairman of Axel Springer, as you probably know, is an Italian. Giuseppe Vita is from Sicily, and he's always called the Prussian Sicilian. Yeah. So perhaps this combination is a real competitive advantage. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
La chiamo tra poco.